discussion on Whither, Georgia. And before I turn it over to Steve Nix, who does a great job with the International Republican Institute, I want to make a very quick point that is very important for everyone to understand. We invited representatives of the Georgian government. We invited representatives of Georgian Dream to participate in the conference, and either they declined or did not respond. That's their choice. I think it's a missed opportunity, but nevertheless, their decision to make. No one can force them to be here. We do have representatives of other parties here, and we welcome them for being here. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Steve. Thank you.
David, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you can hear me okay, and this is not too loud. We've heard yesterday various regional perspectives, specific country perspectives. Today we're going to talk about the Georgian perspective. We have an exclusively Georgian panel, so the subject matter is Georgia and the many challenges that it faces today, but most importantly, to determine ways how Georgia might address and overcome those challenges. And I'll start by framing our panelists by saying that in the debate over the most important issues facing Georgia, the opinions, the hopes, and the aspirations of the Georgian people sometimes get lost. So the question is, what is it that the Georgian people want from representative government and from political parties? Well, I can say, from our perspective, the most prominent request and hope of the Georgian people is EU membership. And this is not Steve Nix's opinion, it's not IRI's opinion, this is Georgian public opinion. IRI's been doing polls in Georgia for almost 20 years. And we started testing the issue of EU membership for Georgia 9 years ago. And the response to that question is the most consistent response of any question that we've asked in any poll since 2013. And that is a resounding yes to EU membership for Georgia. It fluctuates between 75%, in our most recent poll, it was 88%. So clearly and overwhelmingly, Georgian people want to see their country to be a member of this body. Fast forward today, the EU, as pointed out yesterday, has laid out 12 clear steps for the next step, which is defined as candidate status for Georgia. So we know what the Georgian people want. We know what the EU expects. The question for all of us, and what I'll ask our panelists to address today, is how do we get there? How do we satisfy the hopes and dreams of the Georgian people? How do we meet the criteria clearly set forth by the European Union? So I'll frame that question to our panelists. The secondary question that we found from IRI polling data is, in addition to EU membership, people care the most about economic issues, jobs, the economy, pensions, salaries, the bread and butter issues, which again sometimes get lost in the debate, both in government and among political parties. So I'll ask our panelists to also address the way forward and how to address those questions and challenges for Georgia. I'll introduce the panel now. I'll say at the outset, we started on time, we will end on time. We have great panelists today. I'll start with Salome Samadashvili, experience in government as a diplomat, and now as a member of parliament with UNM Georgia. Khatia, who also has service as a member of the executive branch of government, and now a member of parliament, also associated with UNM. And then to my right, Giorgi Vashadze, also experienced as a deputy minister in the government, but also a member of parliament and the head of a new party, which I translate into English as the strategy of David the Builder. If that's my imprecise
We don't have David in name, but still, yeah, of course.
So that's our lineup today. That's the context we want to begin this discussion. We'll start with you, Salome. What's the roadmap? What's the strategy? What's the plan for achieving what the Georgian people so clearly expect of their government and political representatives?
Thank you, and I want to greet the participants of this conference. It is wonderful that this very important international forum has renewed after a pause imposed by the pandemic. And you know, when I was thinking about what to say today, I remembered that a few years ago I had the pleasure to address the same gathering here. And what I have said then was basically that, you know, when we look at the future of Georgia's democracy and where the country is heading, Ivanishvili's government has constructed in our country the space of the funhouse mirrors, basically, where nothing was really as it seemed. And Georgia's European future, the one you referred to, which is so much supported by the Georgian citizens, seemed to be a fata morgana, you know, in a distance, alluring, but then not really a realistic perspective. And Ivanishvili liked it that way and wanted to keep it this way. Now, I think this terrible war that Russia has waged on Ukraine has changed many things, and we have discussed this yesterday here extensively, how it has changed the perception of the world. Where is Russia? Where is our region? Where is NATO and the EU? What is the challenge of the free world? But I think that that war has also changed the perceptions about the realities in our country. In a way, I think the war, as well as several other developments, have forced, I would say, the Ivanishvili to show his government's true colors. And this, you know, world of the funhouse mirrors has collapsed. So when you are asking me what is the way forward, I think in order to have the way forward, it's always good to have the sense of reality. And the Russian-Georgian war and Ivanishvili's government's response to the war, but more importantly, what has happened with respect to Georgia's EU application, I very much hope has brought much needed sense of reality both to the Georgian public and the Georgian citizens, but also to the international community. I'm not going to argue here whether or not Ivanishvili's government's decision to file an application for the EU membership was forced by the fact that we had thousands of people demonstrating in the streets. That's not important. What is important, what has happened since then? What has happened since the application was filed? And quite frankly, I'm not sure if there is a manual. There are many books written how to become the member of the European Union, how to secure the success of your country in the way of application. There is certainly none written on how to fail. And if there is one, I think the author should be the Georgian Dream government, because, you know, if there is any mistake that could have been committed since the application was filed, it has been committed, because there is no way that you arrest the head of major independent TV station, my friend Nick Varamia, who is in jail for absolutely non-existent crime. It's unbelievable even by the standards of this country's justice system that he is in jail, and then you expect to have the candidate status granted to you, you know, a few days later, and you don't expect to do many other things, which I will not go now into the details. So we were not surprised. I was not surprised when the European Union presented us with the very clear conditions and said, yes, you will one day maybe become a member of the European Union, and we want you to become the member of the European Union. It is unprecedented that we have the German Chancellor endorsing Georgia's future in Europe. It's a revolutionary change for this country, and it is an opportunity for which we have been fighting for generations. Let's be honest. This is the generational opportunity for us to become the candidate country. Now, will we let Ivanishvili to steal Georgia's future away, to steal our chance away? What I can tell you is that no, we will not, because the mission that we have identified for ourselves as the generational, you know, as the politicians of a certain generation, is to make sure that this country finds its place in the free world as part of Europe, Holland free and protected. And we will fight for that. Because, you know, losing this opportunity would amount to losing the chance of our nation to independence and basically losing our dignity. And I want to quote the words of Alexander Hamilton, who basically said, if you are willing to give up dignity because you don't want to fight and face the danger, you deserve a master and you shall have one. And we will have a master, and that master will not be just Ivanishvili, but it will be north of here, and this nation will write a sad chapter in its history that in 1917 we managed to receive independence and keep it just for 4 years, and then now in the, you know, in this case we managed to hold on to it for just over 30 years. So for us, this is the fight about life and death, not life and death of our, you know, future as the politicians, but of our nation and our country. But as Ukraine cannot win the war, terrible war against Russia without Western assistance, so the Georgian Democrats, whether democratic opposition or the NGOs or media confronting the oligarchic regime, cannot win this fight on their own either. What I want to argue is that because of the reasons where you started, because of the unprecedented support for the EU membership aspirations from the Georgian people, over 80% of whom support Georgia's future in Europe, the power, leverage that the European Union and the West has over this government, you know, even if it is the government which accuses them of attempting to bring Georgia into war, to extort the price for granting the candidacy and attacks our strategic partners, including their ambassadors, even this government, don't let them fool you. This is, I think, their strategy to pretend that they actually do not care what the West says. No, they do care, because the Georgian public cares, and the leverage that the West has right now and the free world has over this power, I think, has peaked at its maximum level. So the future of Georgia will very much depend on what we do as the democratic opposition in this country, and we have already started the process, which has basically two, I would say, main goals. One is to present, and we have already developed, a very clear vision on how to implement the EU recommendations. And the second is to create the pressure on this government to move forward and to actually do the right things. Why do we need to build pressure? And very often the government is saying, actually, the opposition does not want us to deliver on these conditions, which I hope everybody in this room understands is simply an absurd claim, because the European Union could not have enumerated better all the demands that opposition has had over the years in this country. And what are our demands? Our demands are basically to change the political system that will introduce in this country fair playing political field, because when we talk about polarization, what is causing polarization in this country? Politicized justice and unfair political playing field. What are the EU conditions? The EU conditions are the way to change that. This is why we support it. And the second great pearl that this country has in terms of the future, and that's de-oligarchization. Now, oligarchy is not a unique phenomenon to Georgia. Yes, other countries in the Soviet Union had the same problem, but we have a unique problem because we have the only country where the man who owns the real power in this country also has 30% of country's GDP in personal wealth. We need to to remove oligarchic influence on the politics in this country. We are very concerned that the government might use actually that demand of the European Union to further limit the space for political opposition and media in this country, and we have to be very careful what moves they make. But in the end, if you look at the demands of the European Union, I mean, what is oligarchic state capture? It's a state capture of the system by the interests of one man, and basically the European Union's plan, which you asked about why we support so much, it's a way to change that. Because in the end, if you have the independent court system, that is the step against oligarchic move. If you have free elections, that is a step towards getting rid of the oligarchic influence. If you have independent state institutions, democratic oversight, and everything else that the European Union is asking for. Let me say, and I will, I want to say just a few words about Russia, and I know I'm running out of time, and I will wrap up with that. I spoke about domestic challenges, but Georgia also has an incredible geopolitical challenge, and that challenge is Russia. I don't have time to talk about this long now. Maybe in question and answers we can talk more about that, but what I want to say is this. Freud said that basically history consists of the old mistakes committed by new people. And I think occasionally the humankind has proven him wrong. For example, he was proven wrong when in the beginning of the 20th century, the United States decided to withdraw from the isolationist approach to foreign policy and by that change the world. He was proven wrong when the European Union was created as the institution and has introduced the long period of peace and prosperity in the continent, which was torn apart by the terrible 2 world wars. I really hope that this terrible war that we are now witnessing in Ukraine will be also used as an opportunity by us to prove that we can change history sometimes. And when Ukraine emerges as victorious from this war, I do hope that the world has courage and discipline to think how to move forward, to make sure that the sacrifices that Ukraine has paid and our country has paid in 2008 and earlier in the 90s has not been in vain. So I will close by saying, Slava Ukraine, we wish Ukraine speedy victory, glorious victory, and then peaceful coexistence with Georgia and other European nations as part of Europe, as part of NATO, as part of Europe, whole and free. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Salome. Thank you. First of all, we agree Ukraine will prevail in this conflict. We know it, we believe it, it will happen. We will all stand on a victory platform in Kiev at some point in time. Secondly, thank you for pointing out that the alternative to EU membership for Georgia is both a dark one and possibly a northern one. Very important point. Khatia, now to you. The way forward, how do we address EU membership? What's the plan? What's the strategy? How do you get the votes that you need to achieve these goals?
Thank you very much. First of all, I definitely want to thank the all organizers because this is amazing conference and I'm so glad all our friends from across the pond and just brilliant friends who definitely care about Georgia. They visited Georgia in this very turbulent time, so thank you. Because we are talking about the issue, and I'm honored to have this floor talking about the issue, not an issue, about Ukraine, and talking about Ukraine is very painful for me. Because, painful in a double way, because I was honored to serve not only my country, Georgia, where I was born, but I was also honored to serve Ukraine as the first female national chief of Ukraine in a very turbulent time for Ukraine. And definitely, it was an amazing time when, after Maidan, Ukrainians created their own identity, created new identity, and they definitely showed the world that they're the most courageous people. After this war, Russian aggression, a lot of people started talking about that Ukrainians are so brave, Ukrainians are so courageous, but I have to assure you that I've seen my police units in Donetsk and Lugansk in the buffer zones and the tremendous work they have been doing there. So talking about Ukraine is kind of very painful, but also so much excited because We all are here, and we all believe that Ukraine will prevail. Not surviving, but Ukraine will definitely win, because we all want Ukraine to win. Secondly, it is very painful for me because, you know, talking about Ukraine regarding Georgia's government position about Ukraine was absolutely disgraceful. And once in the parliament, all of us sitting in the parliament and demanding that the Georgian majority to give the floor to President Zelensky after 21st of February. And when Georgian government said that no, we are not giving the floor to President Zelensky to address Georgian people from the government, from the parliament. Or the second, when we had been working with a majority of GD in the parliament, working about the resolution about Ukraine, and then suddenly they refused it, that they will not write down the Russian Federation aggression into this resolution. It was very painful for me when all my Ukrainian friends, especially from the presidential office or MPs or the Verkhovnaya Rada, had been calling me and asking, what's going on? Why Ukraine, who is so much close to Georgia, and why Georgia, which is so much close to Ukraine and Georgian people, that are definitely the same and the one unity with Ukrainian people in this terrible time for us, they definitely decided to be apart and to have this different position. So it was painful for us. The third very painful day for me definitely was the 17th of June. It was painful, it was very emotional, I have to be very open here, when European Union decided to give the status to Ukraine and Moldova, and of course, I was so much proud about Ukraine and Moldova. But it was sad and very emotional when we all just, cleared that Georgia will not get the status, candidacy status, because, European Union, Europe, NATO, transatlantic relations and integration is definitely the choice of 95% of Georgian population. And I have to say why I was proud about Ukraine and Moldova, because I worked in Ukraine. I know how, all the turbulences and challenges of Ukrainian government starting from 2014, but I also worked in Moldova after Ukraine. I was a part of huge criminal justice project, and it was a time, also very challenging time in Moldova, when oligarch Plakhatniuk, they had the same problem, was there, and I remember how Moldova and Moldovan opposition had been fighting about, to definitely be the part of European integration. So, because of Georgian government, I will be very open and blunt, because of the responsibility, primary responsibility, Ivanishvili, who is absolutely the shadow ruling and the last Russian oligarch, yes, Russian oligarch who definitely captures the state, because of Garibashvili, who definitely had this anti-Western campaign, saying all the time, together with the majority leaders, that the Ambassador Kelly Dagner or EU Ambassador Karl Hatzer wanted to drag Georgia into the war. Of course, it was their responsibility that Georgia did not get the candidacy status. Yes, this is a responsibility of Georgian dream. And I firmly believe, maybe I'm wrong, maybe some of the people just think that it's maybe just kind of very tough position, but I definitely believe that until Georgian dream is in power, or until Bidzina Ivanishvili hold the power and capturing the state, Georgia can't become the part of European Union and have the very direct path to European integration. This is first. The second, what we're doing right now here, actually, I also want to definitely make the statement and underline one very important point here. When we're talking about Georgia, and especially the oligarchy shadow government here, because it is absolutely captured, all institutions captured by Ivanishvili, we have to think why Bidzina Ivanishvili's government is a threat not for the Georgian democracy, but why it is threat for Ukrainian victory. Okay, let's think in this way. When war started, and actually I don't like calling this war, it was Russian aggression in Ukraine, and definitely it is genocide. But when this war started, Georgian dream, especially the leaders, they all believed that the Ukraine will lose this war in 3 or 4 days, because we all had been sitting in the parliament when we all had been, just listening to them. And also, I mean, Bidzina Ivanishvili's government, who is definitely not very much can't coexistence with European Union and the Western values, it is a threat for Ukrainian victory. First of all, Georgia did not join the international sanctions, this is first. Secondly, Ivanishvili and Georgian Dream government definitely think that, strategic partnership with Ukraine and being the very, part of associated trio is not very much, just a pass for Georgia. And secondly, Georgia violated the very important belt, security belt, starting from Black Sea to Baltic Sea. So where Georgia stands right now, Georgia does not stand with government, Georgia does not stand with Ukraine. And this is very important. Yesterday, and sometimes when I had been talking about this to my international friends, I have to be very open, they did not like that. But yesterday, I have to also just mention that the Anti-Corruption Agency of Ukraine sanctioned 15 persons, Nazaka, so-called Nazaka, starting from Bidzina Ivanishvili and all other 14 persons very close to him. And why they sanctioned, why they put these names and their names into the sanction list, because it is so much vivid, yet Bidzina and his very close cohort and all the king's men, they have very close relationship with Russia. And yes, I mean, when we had been talking about our friends said that, you have to be very tough with Bidzina, you have to be very tough with his people, you have to be very tough with Georgian Dream, you have to be very tough with the people who are against Ukrainian victory here and against Georgian will, Georgian people's will here. Well, I had been listening the points that, sanctions are not the decision, but Ukrainians, they don't think so. They think that the sanctioning Bidzina and his very close men are so much important. Not because, we are complaining about him and his government, but about the very vivid decision of Georgian Dream that they don't want Ukraine to win. And I have to be very open about that. So I want to have some figures here also. I want to definitely just read these figures for you. When we're talking about the Russian influence in Georgia, it's not about the pro-Western opposition or civil society or critical media's position. It is kind of very important, not the problem, but the security issue for Georgian people and Georgian statehood. Because when economy of Georgia is definitely dependent on Russian economy, and I have to just read here that, for instance, import petroleum products from Russia has been growing monthly this year, definitely. And if we compare this year's figures to the same figures of the previous year, we will see that the growth of petroleum, oil products, imports from Russia started from March, had been increased in sixfold in June and July. This is first, and I have all the figures. The second, in July and June, more than 300,000 Russians entered Georgia, and about more than 7,000 Russian businesses had been registered in Georgia. Of course, this is a security threat, but unfortunately, this is not very much the issue the Georgian government cares about. And the third, Georgia did not join the international sanctions here, but when I had the conversation with the finance minister of finance in the parliament, and I asked him, okay, what are the leverages for you not to violate the international sanctions? And what are the leverages for you to control all the products and goods coming from Georgia to via Larsi to Russia? And he was like, we're doing that manually. So this is a threat. So nobody knows what is going to Russia from Georgia via Larsi. We don't have the control on that, and the Georgian government is not transparent on that. So our plans, and I know that I'm just running out of time, and probably George can add more. Well, we had been working very hard, and I know that a lot of Georgians sacrificed for European Union and NATO. I mean, a lot of my friends, a lot of soldiers, being in the ISAF mission in NATO, just and putting their life for Georgia and European Union future and European future. But also just what we are doing right now is that I don't think that the Russian influence somehow has a future in this country because, you know, on 20th of June, 100,000 Georgians standing on Rustaveli showed it. So they were so, as a one, I don't know, one voice, you know, for Georgians' future. But we have to understand that the opposition, my party, civil society, or even, I don't know, single ambassadors, and we respect them all. I mean, for this tremendous support for Georgian people and Georgian statehood, we can't achieve our goals alone. I'm saying that European Union, according to the resolution that we had right now, I mean, just recently, saying about the political prisoners, Nika Guaramia, health of former President Mikhail Saakashvili, about the justice, political justice, it was very clear. And European Union, especially the parliamentarians, they said that, yeah, Ivanishvili is a threat, not only for Georgian people, but Ivanishvili is a threat for the victory of Ukraine and regional security. So right now, I think, and I had a conversation in DC, for instance, with my friends, and I met a lot of people just sitting here. Right now, I definitely think and hope all our friends, starting from DC to Brussels, will be with Georgian people, having very big pressure, tough pressure, that they're saying to Ivanishvili that, okay, you know, I mean, you can't be in the gray zone, because after Ukraine, after 21st of February, gray zone is finished. Now it's time to be whether with Ukraine on the civilized side, on the bright side, whether on the, you know, dark side with Russia. So, and definitely we will be fighting for them, and we are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Khatia. Thank you for making those important points. Thank you for reminding the audience about Georgia's many and significant contributions to NATO and its sacrifice. Okay, turning quickly to you, George. Back to EU membership. What's the path forward? How do you maintain the support in Parliament to do what is necessary to fulfill the dreams of the Georgian people?
Thank you very much. First of all, thanks to organizers to have such a big and interesting and very important event here in Tbilisi, because entire Georgia is looking on the messages which are coming out from this conference. And let me start again from the quote of Irakli Kobakhidze, chairman of Georgian Dream. The organizers of the ongoing Glory to Ukraine conference in Tbilisi are directly politically affiliated with those political groups which are called radical opposition. So, my dear international colleagues, congratulations, you are part of us, radical opposition here in Georgia. Kakakaladze, again statement yesterday. Those European parliamentarians who are talking about de-oligarchization are enemies of this country. By the way, later on, Kobakhidze agreed with Kakakaladze. So this is the situation that we have. When war has started in Ukraine, I was in Ukraine. And I stayed there for 1 month. I was helping our Georgian citizens to evacuate from country and helping Ukrainians in different humanitarian activities. On the third day of the war, on one of the checkpoints, the soldier with machine gun is stopping us and asking for my passport. And I had a diplomatic passport, and I gave him this diplomatic passport. He saw that it was Georgian passport, and he's asking me with aggressive manner, why your government is not supporting us? Why are they against of Ukraine? And that was shocking for me. I didn't know what to think about. And I was lucky that I had a picture of tens of thousands Georgians which were at the Rustaveli who were supporting Ukraine. And I showed this picture to this man, and I asked him to differentiate Georgian government and Georgian people. And unfortunately, since that time, up until now, we have same, let's say, same environment. Nothing has been changed. And entire Ukraine, I came back from Ukraine just 10 days ago. Entire Ukraine knows now that they need to differentiate Georgian government and Georgian people. Unfortunately, Georgian government, whenever war has started, has chosen Russian side, because there is either Russian side or Ukrainian and Western side. There is no any other third option here. And I think this is very much clear in this case. We're asking a lot of questions like, why Georgian Dream is attacking West? Why they're attacking US and EU ambassadors? Why they're boycotting this conference? Why they arrested Nika Guaramia on the day when Prime Minister started his visit in Brussels, just 10 days before the final decision of European Commission. Why they are adapting the laws which are fully against of European values, just before the final decision of European Commission. Why they're like attacking opposition, why they're like arresting a lot of opponents, why there is politicized justice in Georgia. I think the answer to that is that Georgian government and Georgian Dream does not want to get EU candidacy. I think they tried to do everything to get no from European Union. And they were preparing entire field for that, by the way, in Georgia. They were telling people that geographically we're far from European Union. We're on another side of the Black Sea. Then they were saying that a lot of different arguments. But argument number one in their hand was that they were like trying to convince Georgian people, and they are using this argument up until now, is that West wants Georgia to be engaged in war against Russia, to open the second front here in Georgia. And we, Georgian Dream, and Bidzina Ivanishvili personally, is ready to secure the peace in this country. That's a narrative that they are trying to sell to this 90% of pro-Western, let's say, Georgian population here in Georgia. So my general question is, how many of you have heard about hybrid war? Raise your hands. I'm sure that 100% of the audience have heard about it. But the second question is, how many of you are aware of a government waging a hybrid war against its own people in the interest of the enemy? How many cases are like that in the world? I think very, I even don't know if it happens, if it is happening somewhere outside in the world. But Georgia is the case like that. There is physical war in Ukraine, but unfortunately, there is hybrid war which is ongoing here in Georgia. And my main message will be that if the threat is not fully understood, the actions will not be effective. If that threat is not fully understood, the actions will not be effective. Yesterday, I listened a lot of, let's say, panelists. They were speaking about Ukrainian case. Many of you were speaking that a lot of actions could be done before the war. A lot of things, 2008 should be kind of a good, let's say, lesson for the West, but unfortunately we failed, and so on. Just imagine what can happen in this country in 1 or 2 years from now if we will not identify what is the threat, if the actions will not be in accordance of the threat which is in this country. Unfortunately, maybe Georgia will fail. Georgia will fail, and we will have completely different regime in this country. In 2024, when there is elections, next parliamentary elections, if everything will go in a way as it is, we will not have free media. We will have political, let's say, opposition, either in jail or in high hill mountains somewhere, like dissidents, which are fighting for European perspective of this country. We will have fully Russian-oriented regime in this country. we will have Georgia, which is more close to Eurasian Union than to European Union and NATO. And that's a real threat. And my question is, what Georgian audience have heard yesterday from this conference? The main message was work together. My question to our international colleagues is, with whom? With whom can I work together? We tried a lot. Even if there were like these debates before we got these 12-point, let's say, recommendations from European Union, we, the opposition parties of Georgia, we called for the extraordinary parliament session. We asked once more to Georgian Dream, let's start joint work in the parliament. What they have done, they boycotted this extraordinary session, and they said that we have our own working groups. Then we, opposition, were criticized why we have not joined this, let's say, informal working groups together with Georgian Dream. Yes? And what is the end game of their working group? That they said that we don't want ISFET here, we don't want Transparency International here. Then they said that we will select even from civil society with whom we're going to work. And have any of you saw any kind of paper from their side? What is their vision, clear vision about 12 points? No, because they are not going to conduct these reforms. Because Georgian Dream is pro-Russian political party which is using hybrid warfare, let's say, mechanisms in order to play the role as if they are pro-Western, as if they want the EU candidacy, but they're preparing themselves to the point when they will say, or they're doing everything somehow to get final no from European Union. So the good part of this everything is that I think the Georgian opposition clearly understand this threat. I think this is our work to convince you that threat is real, our international partners. And I hope that when there will be next time this kind of conferences, there will be less about working together, but more about measures that we can conduct together in order to avoid this huge threat that pro-Western Georgia has right now in country. And last point about 12 points, together with our opposition colleagues, through summer, we did a very inclusive work together with civil society, and we prepared our 12-point, let's say, action plan with draft laws. We shared this just last week with civil society. We're waiting for some, let's say, additional recommendations from their side. We will publish it for 15th of September. But believe me, nobody in Parliament is going to discuss our legislative amendments, even if we will register this everything in the Parliament. This is, I don't know, more than 20 or 25 legislative amendments that we will jointly register in the Parliament. So again, final point from my side is that if we will not identify the threat, the actions will not be result-oriented. I do believe that Georgia will go back to this track, which is EU and Euro-Atlantic aspirations, the way of joining European Union, NATO. But for that, we need to work a lot, days and nights, and we clearly understand where we stand right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Giorgi. Thank you, Giorgi. Thank you for your efforts and your colleagues' efforts to include civil society in your undertakings on the EU membership question. Thank you for pointing that out.
By the way, we even opened the door for Gongos. If they were willing to come, they could participate as well.
Very good. Thank you. All right, we'll now start our Q&A session. And here are the rules of procedure. A Q&A session implies questions. So we will take your questions two at a time. We'd ask you, A, to identify yourself, and B, to direct your question to one or more of the panelists. So, off we go. Irakli, will go to you, and then the lady in the green in the back. 2 questions, because unlike David Kramer, I can't keep track of more than 2 questions at a time. Irakli. I'm sorry, in the blue shirt, sorry. Mikrofon jest. Can't hear.
First of all, thank you very much for your speech and for your effort towards democracy and Euro-Atlantic integration. But unfortunately, the problem, in my point of view, it's not only Ivanishvili. It's a problem, in my point of view, that he has supporters, unfortunately, who are poisoned by this propaganda that, for example, Georgian dream managed by this way, that Georgia was avoided the war by this way, not engaged, and how by this way Georgia started the war in 2008, and how Zelensky could not by this way avoid this provocation, etc., etc., etc. And we know by this way, yes, from one side that Ivanishvili and Georgian dream by this way, of course, they act bad, but from the other side, what should be done by this way to win the information policy in this regard and to assure our population that you are better and you are really a guarantee as a pro-democratic and pro-Western forces, guarantee for the further strengthening of the democratic institution of Georgia and EU membership and NATO membership. This is my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Salome, would you like to start?
Thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question. What was the question? How we are going to convince the voters, yes, or?
What is the plan?
People, they are poisoned. I mean, for example, to somehow, by this way, yes, to win the information policy and to assure that you are better than Georgian dream.
Right.
Because according to International Republican Institution or NDI, for example, Georgian dreams rate is about 30%. It's at the first place. We want or not, but it's a reality, and it's painful for us. And this supporter of Georgian dream has 1 bulletin, and you have also 1 bulletin during this voting procedure. This is the problem.
Got it. Salome.
Okay, I think what the gentleman was referring to is that basically the Georgian dream has very strong propaganda machinery, and that propaganda works in terms of trying to brainwash the Georgian citizens, installing in them the fear. In that sense, basically this government, the regime of Ivanishvili, is not very different from any other autocratic government. This is how they rule, by installing fear and having propaganda machinery. If you are referring to the need for the opposition, and not only the political opposition, but also the NGOs, civil society, media, basically everybody who believes that Georgia should be a free country and part of Europe, to have more efficient counter-propaganda operations, I would say that I share the concern. I think one of the problems that we have here, I think this is what Giorgi was referring to when he was talking about the hybrid warfare that the government has unleashed on its own people. I think what he was referring to is exactly this kind of propaganda machinery that the government is using in order to continue having stronghold on its people. So how do we move forward? I think here this is why there is a very great concern on our part that whatever remains of free media in this country is targeted by this government, because you cannot fight very well-oiled propaganda machinery of the government with the empty hands. You actually do need television, you need the information outlets. That's why we're very concerned about basically the trend of this government to go after the independent media. I think we also need to better coordinate within the opposition, but also with again, all the non-governmental players in order to counter the propaganda messages of the government. And many of you in the civil society, I think, are doing great work and are supported by international partners. I think that We are very grateful for all the resources that the West has been putting in this, supporting, basically countering propaganda operations. But I think sometimes in order to find the new solutions and to move forward in the more efficient way, you do have to identify the problem. And I think that one thing we can all agree on right now, which I'm not sure that we would have agreed on if we were meeting here a few years ago, is that the major vehicle of anti-Western propaganda in this country, it's not some Russian language, newspaper or some Russian language media outlet, but it's actually the Georgian government, the government that runs this country. And with that clarity of vision, we need to, I think, step up the efforts to counter the narratives which they are selling. And I'll finish with this. I think the narrative which is, because yesterday I was asked by several of our European colleagues, how do we counter the government's basically policy to of propaganda operations against us? One propaganda message that works, that is used most often by the government, is the message that the West is trying to get Georgia involved in war. That message has to be countered, I think, very often in a very disciplined and systematic way.
Thank you. Thank you, Salome. We had a question in the back.
Opportunity. I have a short question. In the very beginning of his political career, Bidzina Ivanishvili very openly declared that his goal is polarization. Middle must be dissolved. Either you are with me, or you are with Saakashvili, or you just shut up. This is verbatim translation of his 2011 interview. This reminds me very much to Putin's speech in Munich when he said that, like his goal is to restore Soviet Union's dominance, like Russia's dominance, like during Soviet times. So many of my friends and many people are telling me that this calls for unity from our Western partners, which is a very good idea. Unity is good. Takes at least two sides. Two sides. So whenever they are making it, addressing opposition, it looks a bit ignorant, because it looks a bit like, they're not even listening to the oligarch that is ruling this country.
The
question is, what do you think of some of Georgian people's take that the call for unity, that the unity takes two sides? And when the DNA of the other side is the polarization, this is not going to happen, and this is shallow. And second very short question. We've been witnessing the bullying of the US ambassador for the last 3 months. She's been accused in the willingness of killing Georgian people, involving Georgia in war, and many people around me feel sorry for her. How is it reflected on the projection of US strengths here when people feel sorry for the US ambassador?
Thank you. Yes, Khatia.
Thank you very much for the questions. Actually, I will start with a comment from Nika's question. So I will be more optimistic, actually. We understand all here, and actually myself, I had been running twice. Once I had been running. Actually, me and Giorgi, we were the competitors in Isani during the parliamentary elections, and we both lost, well, because of the reasons. And the second, I was a candidate of mayor in Kutaisi, and I won the first round. So I know this, frame of the elections very much, because, I had been the majoritarian candidate for twice. And we understand that they have supporters, sure, but I have to be very optimistic about that. So first of all, according to the polls, and also GD's got those polls, that, the supporters of GD, the number of the supporters dropped significantly because of the June 17th decision. I have to tell you that in the big cities, especially in Tbilisi, Kutaisi, Batumi, and some others, people definitely, probably they are not pro-UNM or pro-Lelo or I don't know, the strategy, but they definitely, are very much concerned about about this decision. And I have to tell you, maybe I will be just very critical to myself and very, that I will have this self-reflection. But we also have to talk to those people. We're talking to our own electoral pool, but those people are very much important. A lot of my friends were on Rustaveli Avenue on June 20th, and they are the supporters of GD. So, I mean, this is a strategy also we have to understand. Secondly, about the, the propaganda, well, I mean, we understand, and sometimes we had been hearing from especially critical media, the opposition is so weak. Well, I mean, I've heard that in Moldova, I lived in Moldova in Chisinau, where Plahotniuc was there, and actually Maya Sandu's party, I mean, I know her personally, he's brilliant, hardworking, Western-oriented, but her party and, opposition was kind of definitely very weak, and their position was very weak because of the regime, Plahotniuc's regime, and Plahotniuc was not definitely, directly pro-Russian, but he used Dodon's platform very well. So, but because of the cooperation, especially with the United States, because of the sanctioning and because of this, the platform, it was possible to sanction Plahotniuc to help pro-Western opposition, and we all understand right now that the Moldova has got the candidacy status. So, well, maybe it's slightly different situation, but I've seen a lot of similarity in Chisinau, just, dealing with their regime. And about the third question, I mean, what is polarization? Actually, yeah, I mean, a lot of our Western partners had been telling me, especially because I represent UNM, that there is two strong parties, UNM and GD, and definitely, I mean, there is a polarization. It's not between those parties. It's not about the parties anymore. It's not about my party. It's not about the fight that me or my party wouldn't want to come into the power and me to just, hold the chair of the minister or prime minister. It's about the Western orientation of my country. It's about that. So, and actually, when we're talking about the parties, it's my own interest. It's our own interest, as a UNM, which is the largest opposition party, that these guys, my partners, our partners, to gain more supporters here in order to definitely just create the unity and defeat Ivanishvili, which I'm sure of.
Good. Thank you. General, we'll go to you.
Please.
Get these questions.
Yeah, and I'll
go to you next.
Thank you. My question is to Ms. Samadashvili. You mentioned the journalist Nika Varamia. Is in jail, I guess, for about 5 months so far. What are the prospects for him being pardoned by the president or this being overturned?
Thank you so much for this question. You are all aware that media the question of media is one of the key points of the European Union's 12-point demands for the conditions to be met. On Gvaramia's case, there are basically two ways to proceed. One way, and this has been position of ours, including my party, but also the opposition, is, of course, the presidential pardon, which would be, quite honestly, the quickest and the easiest way. And I will repeat what I have said also many times publicly on TV, that we always encourage the president to take this step, because this would certainly help depolarization also in this country, and it would certainly help moving forward on implementing the EU-demanded conditions. But there is also an alternative way, and unfortunately that is less likely to proceed, and that would be through the legislative initiative in the parliament that would amnesty basically the provision of the criminal code under which he has been sentenced. But given that the ruling party has the majority, that's unlikely. What I want to say in this audience, I hope to see Nika in prison later this week. I have requested the permission to see him, and I have seen him just before the summer break. He is extremely courageous person. He's somebody who is taking with great courage what he's facing. But that does not mean we should forget that Georgia has a political prisoner in his face, and that his case, I hope, will be more often mentioned also in international media and by our friends in the West, because it's key push towards his release. Thank you.
Thank you, Salome. Thank you. We have 30 seconds left.
Yeah,
We're going to close out. 30 seconds, George.
Very important questions were there, like what is the plan? Let's call it like a question like this. First, to identify the threat, we should understand that three big pockets are fighting against us. Ivanishvili's pocket, state budget, which is used purely for political purposes, and FSB, this Russian intelligence forces, which are spending a lot here in Georgia. I think what we need is unity, but we cannot have unity with Georgian Dream when the goals are different, and I'm answering Tamara's question as well. When the goals are different, there cannot be any kind of unity. GD's goal is different than our goals. What is the good part? That we are trying to coordinate opposition's work, and we're working a lot together in parliament, outside of parliament, and you will see a lot of actions that we will conduct together, because we do think that, let's say, separately, we're weak. If we stand together, all pro-Western forces, we're strong. So that's a way how we can defeat pro-Russian Georgian Dream here in country. And that's a way, that's a space, and that's a process where we need our support of our Western allies. That's very important. Thank you.
May I say just one word on polarization, because I think it's extremely important. Georgia, one of the major challenges that Georgia faces domestically is the inability of the political spectrum to move away from the zero-sum mentality and introduce positive-sum mentality into the politics, because polarization is not really alien to politics. Nobody wants to be in opposition, and you either have power or you don't. It's polarizing by definition. What makes Georgian case difficult is what I mentioned. First, this is politicized justice, because it's one thing to lose power, but it's another to go into jail or to have to leave the country because you no longer have the power. And another is the culture of positive-sum mentality. This is why it was a tragedy when the government has decided to withdraw from April 19 agreement negotiated by President Michel. That was the way forward for Georgia. So as we look forward, I would encourage also everybody to keep in mind that, yes, I didn't agree with the national movement's decision not to sign the agreement, but the withdrawal of the Georgian Dream from that agreement was a clear sign that they actually want to keep polarization, because this is a pillar of their power. And when we're talking about depolarizing, the target for our messaging, I think, should be chiefly the governing party and the current government. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Salome. Thank you, everyone, for your attention. Thank you, panelists, for great presentations. Please join me in applauding them.
Thank you very much.